This afternoon, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Tori Perko. Victoria Perko, BCBA, is a board-certified behavior analyst providing staff supervision and ABA therapy to children at Neurabilities Healthcare's Autism Treatment Center in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Tori pursued a career in behavior sciences because she enjoys learning about what inspires and motivates children. Tori is a graduate of St. Joseph's University and with a bachelor's and master's in science programs. Tori has experience providing direct care to children with autism and other disorders in home, clinic, classroom, and residential settings. Today, Tori will be addressing whining, crying, and screaming. Oh my. The presentation will run approximately 30 minutes. We ask that you mute your microphone during the presentation, and if you have any questions along the way, please enter them into the chat and Tori will address them. So without further ado, Tori, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today and happy Thursday. So thank you, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. And today we're going to be talking about whining, crying, and screaming. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background on me. I know Sarah let you know that I'm a behavior analyst. I'm also licensed in Pennsylvania, and I work with children of various ages in various settings and with also various disorders. What I do is use applied behavior analysis, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that is and how it's going to help us today. And what I do is support challenging behaviors and teach new skills. So a big part of my job is reducing tantruming and whining. If you have not heard of ABA before, it's an evidence-based approach for behavior change. So we actually take data and we used that data to support our interventions that we create. And we observe what happens before and after undesirable behavior to determine its cause. So once we know what's going on surrounding the behavior, we're able to change what happens before and after so that we can increase the behavior we're looking for. So typically there's going to be two reasons for behavior. Your child may want to get something, or they're likely trying to get out of doing something that they don't want to do. And how can I help with the tantruming behaviors that happen surrounding that, right? I already know, and I know that you know, that no one wants to be that parent with the screaming child in public. And we don't want it at home either. It's no fun to have a chaotic environment with screaming and whining. And so basic ABA training is a really good framework to help reduce. So what I'm going to help you do today is take stock of your behavior as the parent. I want to remind you that you are the leader of the household, not your child. So a little bit of taking our power back. And I want to teach you about the behavior trap. So I'm going to come back to how this might work in various examples that we talk about today. But if you give into a behavior to make life easier now, it is likely going to make your life more miserable later because your child's going to realize, oh, if I can tantrum and wait mom or dad out a little bit longer, then they will give in to me. So they're going to continue tantruming because they know that you'll give in. So preventative strategies can be really, really successful in assisting with tantruming behavior and whining and crying because they can prevent the behavior from happening in the first place. So we're going to talk about if you have to tell your child no, if they have trouble leaving a preferred activity, if they don't like being told to do a task, whether that's hard or even sometimes just a task in general. If the child has trouble waiting for an adult to pay attention to them, and if they have trouble expressing basic needs, which can be really difficult for a young child. And if you get past those preventative strategies or you forget to use them, what to do if a tantrum does happen. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the dreaded no. And the thing that I like about this little picture, I have memes sprinkled throughout. And it says, when I tell my kids no 587 times, the child says, so you're telling me there's a chance. And it's highly likely if your child thinks that there's a chance that you'll change your mind when you've already said no, you've probably changed your mind in the past. So I want to make it really important for you to recognize that no means no, and really think about your decision before you say it. If you have a child that can understand that you need to wait, you need to think about it, say, hey, let me think about it and get back to you. And maybe take a few minutes to just kind of contemplate before actually saying no, because sometimes we want to off the right after our child asks something, we want to say no, and then they might beg you and they might try to convince you, and then your no is not actually meaning no. So that is kind of an example where the behavior trap can start happening if you say no and then you go back on your word. So I probably say stick to your word about 100 times during this presentation. Other than meaning what you say, you can also try alternatives. So if your child is really going to have a hard time hearing no, then give them something else that they can do instead. So if they ask, for example, the iPad and they can't have the iPad, maybe all of a sudden you start, and this actually goes with distract and hiding what is not available. You can do them all together. So maybe you remove the iPad so they can't see it. And maybe that happens at a time where they're not even paying attention because you're already distracting them with doing something else. For example, like picking up the Barbies and starting a little imaginative play with the Barbies, or pretending you're a monster and creating some sort of fun game where they don't even really realize that you said no in the first place. Next, we'll talk about transitioning. So if you have trouble taking toys away from your child or just removing them from an activity that they really enjoy, you can use a transition object. So you might have something that you know that they like, especially if you're transitioning from an activity to go somewhere else. Maybe you are out in the community and you need to transition to go home. Maybe they have an item that they can play with in the car and engage with them. And it works usually best, in my experience, when the item is available and you can start playing or using it right away, sort of like how I was saying, distracting in the accepting no, or transitioning when there is something not available. You can do a very similar thing here where you have another item to automatically move them to that they know that they're going to enjoy. Also, you can use like a promise treat. So come with me and you can get whatever that is. And a treat doesn't have to be food. It could be anything that you know that they'll enjoy. The last thing that I would say could potentially work for transitioning is using a countdown. And countdowns, in my experience, they either work or they don't. So you'll notice right away if your child does really well, if you start counting down and they start moving. And if it doesn't work, and if you get to 1 or 0 and they're not moving, I probably wouldn't use that in the future for them. I would probably try one of the other examples that I provided above. And just a reminder, you are totally welcome to put any questions in the chat as we go along. We'll have some time for questions at the end too. Next, we'll talk about waiting for attention. If your child gets upset when you're not paying attention to them, you can consider providing lots of praise when you catch them being good. One thing that I give a lot of feedback to parents on is if you end up in kind of like the behavior trap where you're always yelling rather than giving praise. So if the child's really, really always looking for attention, chances are you're probably not giving enough praise when you catch them being good. And of course, you will want to make sure that they are able to learn the skill of waiting for attention. So I've actually, in my experience, sometimes even using the word wait may be helpful, even if it's just for very short periods of time, to get them used to understanding what that means. And always, if you say that they have to wait, make sure you come back to them to say, oh, thank you for waiting, and tell me what you wanted. And typically they will remind you what they were looking for at that time. So if I'm using a waiting for attention procedure, I'll start really short, like 5 seconds. And once they're able to demonstrate success at 5 seconds, I will move up in time until I get to the designated time we're looking for. So you can use that and see how that works for your child. And of course, build it up over time. You want to be careful about moving too far, too fast. If they are not having success, then you can maybe move back and try to sprinkle in some more examples when you are available, but you want to show them to practice, and you can give them lots of praise when they follow that instruction. Okay. If doing tasks or doing things around the house or completing homework is really hard, consider using like a first then statement. And a first then statement can be very like strict and to the point. So you don't exactly have to say first hard task, then fun thing. You can give your contingency in regular language that you would use with your child. The important part here is to make sure that you are doing the activity, the undesired activity, before getting the fun thing, and that you are withholding that fun thing until the activity is completely done. Because if you say, hey, go do your homework, and then they have availability to, go play the video games, and they're not being followed through with, then they're just going to go play the video games. And if you let them play the video games first, I'm sure you may realize it can be really hard to get them off. And why would they want to get off to go do something harder? So it's better if you put the thing that's undesired first. So some considerations for the preventative strategies we've talked about so far. You can give your child choices, and I would be careful about giving too many. Sometimes just saying, pick it out, go pick out what you want is enough, especially if there's options visibly available, and ask in advance before the whining occurs. Anytime that you're using the preventative strategies, you want to use them in advance before the challenging behavior occurs. And don't worry if you're worried about when it does occur, we will talk about that. Okay. One thing that I want to discuss before we move to if your child does end up tantruming is basic needs. So if your child struggles requesting basic needs or isn't able to yet, make sure that you are the person that's planning accordingly, because you're the one setting the stage for their success. So make sure that you know the times when the hangry behavior starts. And maybe that means that you have a bin in the car that you use for snacks if your child starts getting hungry. If your child gets tired at a certain time, or if you know that they didn't get a really good night's sleep, maybe you're going to use the prevention strategies a little bit more intentionally and make sure that you have more exciting rewards for following instructions. And you might be a little bit more flexible because you understand that, hey, they didn't sleep well last night. So if there's a little bit more whining, I understand. And of course, I understand that it's not always easy as parents to be able to be paying attention to all the variables that takes running a household. But if you know that your child really, really struggles requesting those that, saying, hey, I need a nap, or hey, if they can't have a nap, just avoid running errands at that time if possible. Maybe the nap happens first and then the errand gets run. So we have some familiar examples. I love how this one says, it makes me smile because it says grocery shopping with kids is just yelling, put that back every 30 seconds until everyone is crying. So let's talk about the grocery store and running errands a little bit because this can be really difficult. And I want to note here the big thing that we always talk about as behavior analysts is we understand that the child gets to the candy section and then they want the candy and then they throw a tantrum and then the parent ends up giving the candy because they don't want to be tantruming in front of everyone and it's embarrassing. So we can set up the grocery shopping trip for success before the tantrum even occurs. So you could give your child a very specific instruction, like we're going to keep our hands to ourselves and we're going to be quiet. And if we keep our hands to ourselves and we're quiet, then we can get the candy at the end. Or I know a parent actually that does a specific grocery list, which I think is absolutely great. And they have 3 items that can go on the list. It can be whatever the child chooses. And if they try to choose something else, then they are able to swap it out for something else, but they can still only get 3 items. So that might be good to use with your child. Hey, you can only get 3 things. Are you sure these are the 3 things that you want to get? And then have them choose between what they have already put in the cart. So those are some simple strategies that you can use. If your child doesn't follow the rules that you provided for them or the contingency that you place, then make sure that you follow through. And if they didn't earn their candy, it may cause a tantrum, but it will teach them in the future, I have to follow the rules so I can get the reward. Leaving the park, I can imagine that this can be difficult for some children who enjoy playing with their friends, who have a really fun time on all of the equipment at the park. So I wanted to mention here, this is a transitional situation where you're moving from a fun thing to maybe a not so fun thing. So if you're going to the park, it might be really good to either have something in the car that the child really enjoys or be going somewhere that the child's really excited about. Like maybe you plan it around lunch and you know that they're really going to be excited to go to the lunch place that you're going to choose. So you can use that as support on your journey home or journey out of the park. Okay, now they're tantruming. If those strategies, maybe you are starting to hold on a contingency that you didn't have before, or your child just starts tantruming because they had a hard time with a scenario, it is best to wait the behavior out. So you might say, I'm going to wait until you're calm if they can understand. And you can stick to your word always. So like I said, in the grocery store, if they didn't follow your rules and they didn't earn the reward, you're not going to give them the reward just because they tantrumed. You may need to place your items to the side if you're out in public. If not, you might be able to just bring them to a quiet, private place. Maybe that is bringing them to the car and waiting for them to calm down, especially if necessary, if it gets escalated to that point. So you might bring them to the car, you might have to bring them home, and you might have to ask the person at the store or let them know, hey, I have to leave and come back later. If there's another person with you, maybe they can check out while you handle the behavior in the car, especially in a store setting. And wait to do any praise or hugging until after your child calms down. This is really important because you don't want to reinforce the crying and whining behavior. So you may want to, you may have the desire to give them a hug if they're really upset. And you know your child best, you're the parent. So if that works and that is something that you have done with your child, then that might be something that you continue to do, but you have to be really careful about showing them that they get attention when they cry. So just keep that in mind. And it's best to typically move forward. So if the child calms down and you let them know, thank you for calming down. And maybe you talk to them a little bit about the behavior if they're able to understand, then we will move forward, and we as parents are not going to continue to bring it up over and over. If you feel like you need to address the behavior and that works really well for your child, and talking them through, hey, this is how we behave and this is not how we behave, that's okay, but just be careful about ruminating over it for a long period of time. And I would say it's best, maybe if you say, we're sticking with the grocery store example, if they had challenging behavior and they didn't follow your rules, and then you're going back to the grocery store again, you may remind them of the rules. Hey, this is how we're going to act. And hey, this is what we have to do. Remember, this is how we earn our reward. So that may be really helpful. And I want to mention in my closing comments that if a tantrum is happening very frequently, or you're seeing a lot of tantrums, it may be best to talk to the pediatrician. There might be something else going on that's underlying that would be important for the doctor to know about, and you might need to do a little more investigating about why those tantrums are happening. And like I said, you are the parent and you know your child best. So absolutely use that to your advantage at any time, whether that's in your preventative strategies, whether that's during the tantrum, and whether that's about debriefing the tantrum or not debriefing the tantrum. You're the parent, so you absolutely know your child. And don't forget to be careful of the behavior trap.